The secret side of me, I never let you see. I keep it caged, but I can't control it. So stay away from me, the beast is ugly. I feel the rage and I just can't hold it. It's scratching on the walls, in the closet, in the halls. It comes awake and I can't control it. Hiding under the bed, in my body, in my head. Why won't somebody come and save me from this? Make it end. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I hate what I've become, the nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster. My secret side I keep hid under lock and key. I keep it caged, but I can't control it. Cause if I let him out, he'll tear me up, break me down. Why won't somebody come and save me from this? Make it end. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I hate what I've become, the nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster. I feel like a monster. It's hiding in the dark, its teeth are razor sharp. There's no escape for me, it wants my soul, it wants my heart. No one can hear me scream, maybe it's just a dream. Maybe it's inside of me. Stop this monster. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I hate what I've become, the nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I feel like a monster. I'm gonna lose control, it's something radical. I must confess that I feel like a monster. 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 I feel like a monster.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about A.S. Biot and the Thing in the Forest. We're also going to be discussing setting, so let's get to that first. Your setting is your where and your when. Everybody knows this. Simple stuff. It can be your time, place, social environment, milieu, the overall, everything, okay? When we're referring to time, we mean a temporal setting or a plot time. 2:30, 1882. Could be very restricted. There was a show on TV a few years back, 24, and each one of those episodes took place within a 1 hour time frame. So it was, what you were seeing took place between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. Very restricted in terms of what time things take place. Historical fiction needs to take place during a certain time. You can't have a fictionalized version of, the American Civil War, but have the year be, 2222. It doesn't work. It's not a historical fiction then. Place is your geographical or your physical setting, right? So the place of the story would be, in the case of the story we're talking about, the forest. Or London, okay? It's someplace that you can get to on a map. Maybe limited to a single area, such as Room, okay? That book by Emma Donoghue, where most of it takes place in a single room. Or it could take place in many different places, such as The Room with Tommy Wiseau, the really bad movie. It takes place in several different places. You have common, unique, fantastic, or impossible places. So you could have someplace common like, the park, or someplace unique or fantastic like, the Shire for Lord of the Rings fans, or someplace impossible to even imagine, such as, Asgard. This is where you get your fantasy and your magical realism. Those come into play in terms of your place. We have a general setting, we have a particular setting. The general setting of a story, year, region, country, world, okay? General, not a specific place. Often provides some kind of historical and cultural context. If you have a story that's taking place in the USSR, for example, you know that it's not present day because the USSR doesn't exist. And you know that it's going to be taking place in, a very tumultuous time, very tumultuous culture. Because if you know anything about the USSR, it was it was communist run. It was the Soviet Russia. Okay? Particular setting is very specific. So instead of, a park, it would be Memory Park, or Central Park, or Bryant Park. Your particular setting will always lie within your general setting. What is the function of a setting? It's an integral part of the story. You kind of can't have a story without a setting. You need a setting, whether it's time or place or both. It establishes your mood, it establishes your situation, and it establishes your story's character. It can have an emotional effect or a meaning on your reader. We can read stories that take place in particular settings that are like, oh, that's cool. And then somebody else can read the same story, and it affects them differently because of the setting. So you could have a story that takes place in, England, and you're like, that's a pretty cool story. You're from America, so you don't know. But then somebody from England reads it, and it hits them harder. It hits them different. The setting can help to reveal or shape a character depending upon their actions in that particular setting. Helps show us aspects of their personality and their outlook on life and what their values are. Again, dependent upon that setting and how it factors into the overall story and the overall telling of the plot. It also acts in the plot, so it acts as a part of the plot, an element of the plot, if you will. A setting can prompt a character to action. It can prompt their action, tell them where to go. If they are in a room and there's two doors and one of them is locked, obviously they can't go through the locked one. They have to go through the other one. That's the setting. Okay. Setting can suggest a key conflict or a theme. Sometimes your setting can be your antagonist. There's also vague setting and vivid setting. So vague settings urge us to see conflicts and aspects of the human experience. They're not specific. They're vague. They're terms like once upon a time, a long time ago, the forest, a village, a cottage. Nothing specific. Vivid settings give your story purpose. Historical fiction will use vivid settings. Vivid setting would be, instead of saying a long time ago, you would say in March of 1886. Or instead of the forest, you would tell us exactly in Sherwood Forest. Okay, so this again is kind of like general and specific, or general and particular, but they're technically two different terms. Most fiction occupies some kind of ground between vague and vivid. This helps fiction to draw the attention to the way that people, their experience, and their conflicts are twisted into particular form and fashion by your author. Your author will take your expectations of what should be in a setting and he'll twist them, or she'll twist them, by using this idea of vague and vivid setting. traditional expectations of time and place. Effects and meanings are evoked, and these depend on our traditional associations with particular places, particular times, particular weather conditions, things of that nature. So, if you associate rain with something terrible might have happened to you at some point. Maybe you don't remember, maybe you do. But you're going to have that emotional response based on that. Culture influences settings, okay? Culture influences settings. Plays to the human vulnerability. Authors play with these associations and will flip them. Cowboys versus aliens, okay? It's a film that takes place in the Midwest of the United States just after the Civil Wars ended, when the cowboys roamed. So you think it's going to be just a straight historical fiction about cowboys. And then aliens show up. Why? Who the hell knows? Stories rely on setting to evoke that emotion. If they doesn't evoke that emotion, then the author has not done his or her job. Okay? The optional reading for this week is Stephen King's Children of the Corn. And the reason that story is chosen a lot of times to look at alongside this idea of setting is because the idea of the cornfield itself is very unsettling. So that was setting. Let's go into our author and our story. So this is A.S. Biot. She is still alive. She was born August 24th, 1936. Born Antonia Susan Duffy. She's an English novelist, poet, and playwright. She's twice married with 4 children. Her older son is deceased, unfortunately. As I had mentioned, a lot of these authors will have family issues, and Antonia Biot is no exception. She had a very unhappy upbringing. She was not close with her mother. Her mother was very domineering, very much trying to control every aspect of Antonia's life. She also has a strained relationship with her sister, who is also an author, whose name is Margaret Drabble. She writes in realist fiction. Now, if you've read the story, then you know that this isn't 100% realist fiction. But there were the planes that dropped the bombs. There were the children had to be evacuated from London on the trains. World War II was a real thing. England's a real place. So it's taking most of these real life elements and kind of weaving them into this idea of a fictional tale that could have happened. Most of the elements of it could have happened. So let's look at some historical context. So as I said, the story takes place during World War II in London, in England. The Luftwaffe were the German Air Force, and they would fly over London and drop bombs during World War II. Children were evacuated. They were loaded up into trains, oftentimes with nothing but the clothes on their back, and they were loaded up into trains and just evacuated, just taken. They were placed in homes of people that lived just outside the city or further away because they weren't being bombed. It was only London. You have the invasion of Poland happening on September 1st, 1939. And that heavily influenced the story. The story was written after 9/11. So it takes place during a huge historical, military, tragic conflict, and it was written after another one, where we entered the war on terror. The story itself was first published in the New Yorker on June 3rd, 2002. So this is a newer story. It was republished in 2003 as Little Black Book of Stories, which is this book right here, which is brown, but who cares, right? contemporary fantasy and horror. Those are the two main genres that it falls into. Your antagonist is just a thing in the forest, or as they call it, the loathly worm. Some of the themes of this are trauma and loss. These kids have lost everything. They've had this very traumatic experience. Some of them, like Alice, have even lost their lives. And it's how do we cope with that? How does that shape us as an adult? And that, I think, at the heart of the matter is what Antonia Biot is trying to say with this story. Reality versus fantasy. This is going to come up a lot. But we kind of looked at that a little bit with the allegory of the cave, right? What is real and what is not? Is it possible to think something into existence? Is it possible to believe in something so much that you pop it into existence? Is that what the girls did with this worm? Relationships, familiar relationships, intimate relationships, friend relationships, they really don't have many because of this childhood loss and trauma kind of affecting their lives. War. The worm historically shows up every time there's some kind of major conflict somewhere. And again, that kind of ties into takes place in World War II. The first half takes place in World War II. The second half takes place in the 80s during the Cold War. Then the last section of it is these girls don't know better. These children don't know better. Good versus evil. Memory. Memory is a weird thing. Because you can remember something that never happened. If you believe in it enough, you can remember something that never actually happened. They've done experiments with this where they make people believe things that never happened. Innocence. This is probably one of the best examples of this idea of the loss of innocence. Alice, again, being that example. She is, this little tiny bubbly child, blonde hair, blue eyes, barely out of diapers, and she ends up getting killed. There's no better example of loss of innocence that you're going to be seeing than that. Escape is another theme and symbol from this story. I mean, they're forced to escape, but they still escape London during this terrible time. So what does the loathly worm look like? It's described in the story as thus. Its face, which was triangular, appeared like a rubbery or fleshy mask over a shapeless sprouting bulb of a head, like a monstrous turnip. Its color was the color of flayed flesh, pitted with wormholes, and its expression was neither wrath nor greed, but pure misery. Its most defined feature was a vast mouth, pulled down and down at the corners, tight with a kind of pain. Its lips were thin and raised like welts from whip strokes. It had blind, opaque white eyes, fringed with fleshy lashes and brows like feelers of sea anemones. Its face was close to the ground. Its forearms, which were squat, thick, powerful, and akimbo, like a cross between a washerwoman's and a primeval dragon's. The flesh on these forearms was glistening and molted. The rest of its very large body appeared to be glued together like still wet paper mache. It had a tubular shape as a turd has a tubular shape. So your assignment here was, I asked everybody to draw what they thought the loathly worm looked like, and here are some. right? Because, I didn't know. Here's some other things that some people have submitted that they had imagined the loathly worm kind of looked like. Not necessarily original creations, but, just some things. That's the loathly worm. That's the thing in the forest. So you can move on now. The Cask of Amontillado and the Telltale Heart are all in one video. So